People, I want to talk about something here that we've covered before, but it's getting much worse faster. And it's going to affect everybody, probably you directly, and also indirectly, whether or not you're in one of these institutions. What am I talking about? If you recall, over a year ago, I started raising the alarm bell with regard to what's happening with the financial sector, with the banks. Shortly after that, we watched the regional banks basically implode on themselves. And we're going to see that to a much larger degree moving forward. And it's going to affect the major banks as well. Let's just outline this real quick. And the reason why I want to talk about this again is it's not getting any better. There's no end in sight to this. It's going to affect millions and millions of people moving forward. And this is deliberate. Again, we're looking at a consolidation of the system. We have outlined this repeatedly in this video blog. But let's break this down a little bit further here. So I'm hoping you're going to take action, is why I am sitting here today with this. So we've been hearing a lot of talk lately, okay? Something that has been devoid from the mainstream media propaganda ministries about commercial real estate, and the exposure of the investment banks. This one thing, in my view, is going to be the straw that breaks the camel's back. We already understand, you and me, and we've covered this to the point of ridiculousness. No deposits, no loans, and no deals. What did we find out just this week? Pending home sales have now hit an historic low. We've made history. When people hear these kinds of things, it just kind of goes in one ear and out the other. But what's the ripple effect here? The ripple effect is pretty simple, as we have outlined already. The banks are not making loans, they're not making deals. And on top of that, they're seeing defaults skyrocket. Now, people hear that too. Oh, loan defaults are skyrocketing. You know, every type of loan. We're talking about credit cards, personal loans, auto loans, obviously mortgages as well. They just let it go in one ear and out the other. The fact of the matter is, this is going to directly affect the banking sector, and it's going to affect you. There's going to be massive bailouts coming. Just be bailouts, bail-ins. It's all going to be blamed on COVID. You all know that. Look, what have these banks done? And again, there's no responsibility anymore. No one's held to account. So what you and I should be clear on here is these institutions have loaded up on debt that is yielding nothing. And because of that, in this rising rate environment, these institutions have watched the value of their balance sheets disappear. Just poof, gone, and it's gone kind of thing. Yeah, absolutely. And then on top of that, again, you got the loan default issue here. No deals, no deposits are non-existent. The savings rate today is near a historic low. As a matter of fact, we're seeing a silent bank run go on. People are pulling their cash faster than ever out of these institutions, but you're not allowed to know that either. And then, of course, we have the overall issue of derivative exposure. I'm telling you people right here and right now, yet again, get out. Get out of the major investment banks, or just keep what you have to in them. Look for some other place to park your cash. A lot of people are asking me lately, and I've covered this too, but I'm getting some new subs, I guess. People are saying, hey, Greg, what about brokerages? Brokerages are not safe either. Actually, there's nowhere that is safe. Let me just say that too. People sometimes hear things that I don't say. I never ever said that credit unions are safe. I said they are safer. In theory, a brokerage account is insured up to $500,000. Everything is in theory here. Now, with regard to credit unions that I've been telling you for the longest time, they are safer because they don't have the exposure to derivatives. They do have massive exposure, obviously, to loans that are going bad right now. But this is really a replay to a much larger degree than the last financial crisis, with the world financial system and the people with it to its knees. So today, okay, today's the day for you to think about if you have your cash in a commercial institution, a commercial bank, one of the big Wall Street banks, let's just say, okay, you got to think about getting that cash out of there, people. You could wake up and find out that your bank has closed. And it doesn't even have to be a mega bank either. The health of the financial system has never been worse than it is. The FDIC knows it is. The FDIC knows which banks are failing. They're not going to tell anyone. You could call your bank. They're not going to tell you either. You got to use your own common sense here. All right, look, so I just wanted to cover that again real quick. I raised the alarm bell before the meltdown here with regard to the regional banks, and I'm trying to raise people's awareness right now because we're going to face another crisis on a scale that people aren't going to believe with regard to the banking system. And of course, it's going to be consolidated. And this is being set up that way. This is a lot of the reasons why you're not hearing what we're talking about from the mainstream media. Nobody knows. Remember what I'm telling you. Nobody knows until everybody knows. And when everybody knows, it's too late. So you got to be ahead of the curve. And this is what I'm trying to do with my video blog, with this blog here, is keep all of you ahead of the curve, as far ahead of the curve as I am possibly able to do that. Now, with regard to our strategy, you and me, if we're taking advantage of everything that comes along our way, we're not going to deviate. Betting against the debt, becoming your own central bank, holding hard assets here, having exposure to a lot of things here. Commodities are big. You look, I'm not telling anyone to buy or sell anything, okay? But just use your own common sense. If you and I understand that the environment is risk on, we've been talking about this again to the point of nauseum, meaning the Fed is determined to pump this market for multiple reasons right now. The illusion of the market is a very powerful thing. It's the end of year. They want to prop up the market so the fat cats at the corporations can get their big, fat, ugly year-end bonuses, which are based on stock share price. It's a presidential selection cycle. They're going to pump the market, meaning they're going to suppress rates further. They're going to weaken the currencies further, and that's going to drive cash into the stock market. That's what it's designed to do. On top of that, we are due for some kind of a correction. You all know that I am waiting for it. I am waiting for this market to drop so I can buy more. As long as, and I'm going to specify this again, as long as they can keep risk at bay, they suppress rates, which I know they're going to, so do you. They're going to suppress the value of the currency on a relative basis. I'm referring to the dollar, very bullish for the stock market. The MMRI, again, I feel like this is going to drop probably below 250, not too far off here. Mandarino Market Risk Indicator, free to everybody, link in the description of this video. Look, if you follow this blog, I'm laughing, but it's so true. You're light years ahead of the pack, of the curve. People have no idea what they're doing or what they're doing it, but you do. Okay, so we're not going to deviate from our plan here. Betting against the debt, becoming our own central bank, getting long the market right now, if you are so inclined, having some cryptocurrency in your portfolio. I think it's you have to. Okay, I don't even care if you hate this stuff. All right, having some in your portfolio can't possibly hurt you. I think the gains here with regard to cryptos is going to be staggering moving forward. Bitcoin this morning back over 38,000. It's extremely volatile, and I understand it's not for everyone. But I can't. If you're someone who understands the situation, how cash moves through markets, it's a very simple concept. Risk on, then there's risk off. Risk off is going to drive when this goes risk off. Risk off meaning dead market meltdown, putting pressure on the stock market. Cash is just going to look for places to go. Commodities, big one. Period. I've been telling you this since forever here. So you need exposure there. If you do subscribe to my free newsletter, I put it out yesterday. A new list of exchange-traded funds which would allow you exposure to commodities. Hold it in your hand as well. You know, physical silver, my favorite commodity, if you want to call it that. It's real money of old time. Then gold, platinum, and palladium. Platinum is on sale right now as well. It's crazy. But expect volatility in commodities while the risk-on game is being maintained. I've told you this, but that presents opportunity, people. All I'm trying to do here, I am trying to explain to you where the opportunities are. So you can sit back, think about it, okay, and then decide whether this is what you want to do or not. But you must do something here, okay? You have to take action in this environment. It's completely rigged against you. So we will weaponize the system against those that are trying to destroy us, period, the end. Make sense to you? Anyway, trading doesn't start for about an hour and 20 minutes. Get stock futures right now slightly lower. 10-year yield stable over the past few days. That illusion of liquidity is being maintained. You know that. We've talked about this a million times. It's the Fed. They're buying it all. The dollar right now, relatively flat. Crypto's getting a bit higher, as I said. Gold and silver under a little pressure right now. Crude oil about flat. Okay, expect volatility with crude oil, but in the long run, it's a commodity. I like it. I think it's where you need some exposure here moving forward, period. That should basically outline the situation if we, but don't lose sight of what this video is all about. And I don't think there's another guy out here trying to warn people as to what's happening here in the financial system, especially the banks, and the silence with regard to not hearing too much about this. Although it's getting some coverage here now, the commercial real estate exposure that these institutions have, I mean, it could be, no one knows, this is a black hole. It's a black hole, which means you and I must raise our awareness and we must be on guard. You understand? For where this is going. People, I got your back and I know you got mine. Speaking of that, people, this is the first of the month. On the first of every month, I humbly ask for your support. Hey, Greg, you're doing a good job. I asked for $5. $5 is all I ask for every month. In the description of this video, there are several links. You can send me $5, and I'd appreciate if you would click on one of those links. One is from Stripe. One is from PayPal. I love cryptocurrencies. That's down there as well. Or you can hit that little heart if you are subscribed here, and you can send me $5. I'd appreciate that. People, support my work, please. I support you. I hope you support me as well. I know you will. We got each other's backs, and that's the most important thing. All right, so with that said, people, please, if you got something out of this video, let me know about it. I want to hear from you. Comment. Thumbs up, extremely valuable. Let's get this video out there. Let's raise people's awareness as to what's going on here. I don't know what else is in my power to do to warn people what's going on here with the financial system and the banks. I really don't know what else I can do. That's why I'm counting on you to get this stuff out there. All right, so again, please support my work. Links below. I really appreciate that, and I'll see you later. 4:05 p.m. Eastern time for my live stream. Let's do this. All right, I want more people to participate in the live stream, and I want to interact with you directly. I want to answer your questions directly. All right, love you a lot. See you later.
Don't you wanna see them tumble to the ground? We can be the difference, make it. We can be the walls come crashing down.
Located high on the Andean plateau of South America, in the country of Bolivia, can be found the ruins of a once mighty civilization, and amongst them the clues to one of history's most unique and enduring mysteries. What was this place? When was it built? How in the world did these people survive in ancient times at nearly 13,000 feet or 4,000 meters of altitude, well above the tree line, in a place seemingly antithetical to large populations and civilization itself? Why build a city here, where crops are difficult to grow, and the struggle for simple existence is a daily battle? And then there's the form of the city itself. Just how was this stonework achieved? Some of the remnants left to us are both unique and utterly remarkable in their design, a seemingly playful style of endless, perfectly shaped corners, angles, channels, and even tiny drilled holes, formed with an obvious mechanical precision into very hard stone, an aspect of these ruins that is rarely explored and then never by the mainstream. Known today as the twin sites of Tiwanaku and Pumapunku, there has been considerable controversy around just when they were originally built. If you ask mainstream academia, the consensus is generally that it was founded around 110 AD and went on to eventually collapse around 1000 AD. This estimation of the age of Tiwanaku, made around 2012, is derived entirely from the results of C14 radiocarbon dating and another technique known as obsidian hydration dating. And although there have been carbon-14 results from organic material found at the site going back to 1500 BC, these results have been dismissed as unreliable. Even so, this date of 1500 BC isn't close to the date suggested by other evidence for the true age of this mysterious megalithic city in Bolivia. The man who was responsible for the vast majority of the excavation, research, and even protection of the site in our modern era was Professor Arthur Poznański, an Austrian born in Vienna in 1873, and he spent nearly 50 years working, researching, and publishing on Tiwanaku, work for which he was widely recognized for in Bolivia before eventually passing away in La Paz in 1946. Just a year before that, in 1945, his life's work was culminated in the production of the magnificent volumes known as Tiwanaku, the Cradle of American Man. These books are hard to find and quite expensive when you do, but thanks to the supporters of this channel in the last couple of years, I've been able to source them, and will be their caretakers for a while as I use them for research and share the results with you all here. In Poznański's work, spread across 4 volumes that span a vast array of topics, he dates not the founding of the city, but rather the second period of occupation at Tiwanaku to the period around 15,000 BC. That's 17,000 years ago, a date unsurprisingly scoffed at by modern academia, who point to radiocarbon dating as a rebuttal, and on that basis simply dismiss Poznański's work. But just how valid is this dismissal? After all, carbon-14 dating might just be the last time somebody was buried there, or started a campfire there. It says nothing about the age of the stonework itself. Although Poznański's research was done before radiocarbon dating was a thing, he didn't just pull the figure of 15,000 BC from thin air. Rather, it is the result of studies of the geological and climatic history of the region, connections to now extinct flora and fauna, semi-fossilized animal remains, folklore, cultural history, and Tiwanaku's connections to other ancient cities of the Americas, studies of erosion at the site, and most significantly, astronomical dating based on the alignment of a structure known as the Calisaya, which is much more than simply a ceremonial space. It is, in fact, a very accurately constructed solar observatory. Quoting Arthur Poznański from his summary in the chapter of the probable age of Tiwanaku, quote, "If one wished to collect all of the ideas about the great age of the civilization of Tiwanaku with the attendant bases and proofs, one could fill a whole book. But we feel certain that in the preceding paragraphs we have outlined in a clear and synthetic form the nature of such proofs, which are astronomical, anthropological, paleontological, geological, petrographic, and sociological. By consulting the literature cited in the notes accompanying the text, complete and precise information may be had about all the subjects which have been treated very hastily in the present chapter." End quote. Funnily enough, and despite mainstream archaeology's brusque dismissal of Poznański's primary work, much of his observations in these history-adjacent scientific fields like geology and astronomy have in fact been validated and strengthened by modern research in recent years. So, where does the truth lie here? I hope you'll join me as we investigate just what's behind these claims, and see if we can shed some light on the possible origins of one of history's most unique puzzles, the incredible remains of Tiwanaku and Pumapunku, high up on the Altiplano of Bolivia. I have produced a video on this site in the past, a couple of years ago now. It's an overview of the various complexes and an introduction to the forms of stonework that you can find here. We also get into some of the recent discoveries and issues surrounding the site, the orthodox dating timeline, and some of the connections to other ancient cultures, so check out that video if you're looking for an introduction. In this video, we're going to dive into the specifics of the dating claims around Tiwanaku and provide some context by explaining the phases of occupation, as well as the construction and destruction that has occurred here. We'll also leverage Poznański's amazing documentation and take a look at the architecture of the various complexes on the site and how those have changed since he began his work in the early 20th century. Speaking of Poznański's work, these really are some amazing books. Large cloth-bound volumes with many meticulous drawings, photographs, maps and foldouts, and I'm thankful to be the caretaker for these for a while. I am in the process of slowly digitizing and photographing them, and I'll be making the chapters and resources quoted in this video available for patrons and channel members, as a small token of appreciation for supporting Uncharted X. I've also done this with other rare books as well as my LiDAR scans from ancient sites around the world. If you're interested in these resources or in supporting the channel, please do check out my Patreon or the join button here on YouTube, or any of the other value for value methods at the support page on my website at unchartedx.com/support. Arthur Poznański titled Tiwanaku the cradle of American man for good reason, as he believed that once Tiwanaku itself became unlivable, for reasons that we'll get into, its inhabitants slowly spread out into the Americas and left their cultural legacy and clues within later ancient civilizations for us to decode today. In a previous video, South America's megalithic age, link is below, I highlighted one of these connections, the art style and symbology that is shared between Tiwanaku and Chavín de Huántar, a site that goes back as far as 3000 BC, located in the northern mountains of Peru, with its famous Raimondi stelae and anthropomorphic idols and artwork, much of which is found in underground labyrinths. Another strong cultural connection between Tiwanaku and later civilizations is that it seems to have been the genesis for the well-known Chicana, the stepped motif that is also known as the Incan cross. This can be found across many existing sites, particularly those attributed to the Inca. The Inca associated this stepped shape to the three planes of existence as part of their mythology, and I've explored this concept in more depth in my video on the mysterious megalithic cave of Napahuaca, again the links below. Poznański documents many more connections between the culture of Tiwanaku and those of presumably later ancient civilizations, as shown by this map, illustrating the radiation of cultural indicators into not just South America, but also Central and North America. Quoting Professor Poznański from his prologue, quote, "Up to this time there has been studied with considerable care the interesting prehistoric culture of northern Argentine, and still more the vast patrimony left by the ancients in the Gran Peru, Central America, Mexico, and the United States. But until the present there has not been discovered the foundation of South American culture, the ascensional ladder leading to the relatively high cultural stage at which the peoples of this hemisphere were found by the European conquistadors upon their new arrival. We call it new because America had been visited previously by Europeans, as has been proved beyond all doubt from the latest studies and discoveries. On the other hand, only very superficial investigation has been given the great civilization that flourished thousands of years ago on the lofty plateau encompassed by the Andes. Today, this region is at a very great height above sea level. In remote periods, it was lower and possessed climatic conditions conducive to the creation and the well-being of large human groups. Here, the struggle for existence was not arduous. As a result, there developed a stable life, a settled one, which permitted the perfecting of a noble art, adequate moral customs, laws regulating social conduct, and fairly advanced agricultural methods based upon an elaborate astronomical science. But nothing endures forever. Great civilizations are destroyed, and new ones are engendered, sometimes inferior, occasionally superior to those that went before. Thus it befell the metropolis of Tiwanaku. Having reached in very remote times almost the apogee of the civilization then attainable, it declined rapidly because of adverse geological changes. Since the surroundings were impaired, malign climatic conditions arose. Climatic aggression put a walking staff into the hands of the dwellers upon the Altiplano, forcing them to go on, until they found suitable locations where they could again establish themselves and enjoy the fruits of their labours. These emigrants then, carrying with them their cultural baggage, spread throughout all those parts of the hemisphere which still remained unaffected by the climatic aggression, disseminating as they went their enlightenment and beliefs." End quote. The possibility of civilizations existing in South America many thousands of years ago isn't just an idea unsupported by evidence, quite the contrary. While the most well-known culture of the region, that of the Inca, thrived during a short period in relatively recent times, the 14th to 16th century AD, many researchers speculate that it was itself built upon the ruins of a long-gone and undocumented megalithic civilization. This idea is supported by analysis of the stonework, architecture, and the timeline of the 13 successive High Inca rulers. I've explored these topics in some depth in several videos. Links to those are also below in the description. There are, however, other sites and evidence for older civilizations outside of the Inca. In the highlands to the northeast of Lima, the site of Chavan de Huanta, or Chavan Temple, as mentioned earlier, has a history stretching back 5,000 or more years with radiocarbon results from around 3000 BC, as well as evidence for massive megalithic work found on the site. It's a beautiful and remote place, one that I visited in 2016, and research on the site shows a direct connection to the culture of Tiwanaku. Another connection between these sites can be found in the evidence for low-stepped pyramids, which were features at both locations. The structure at Tiwanaku, known as the Akapana, although covered in sediment today, is in fact a large stepped pyramid with a reservoir in its center. Another pyramid site exists in Peru, on the coastal deserts north of Lima, known as Corral. Here also there is strong evidence dating this site back to at least the time of the Old Kingdom in Egypt, some 5,000 years ago, around 3000 BC. Corral is still actively being excavated and researched, but it features at least a dozen low-stepped pyramid structures. I hope to produce dedicated videos for both Corral and Chavan at some point in the future. So, if we go with Poznański's theory that adverse geological changes and climatic aggression put a walking stick in the hands of the people of Tiwanaku, who then migrated north, possibly forming the origins of other known ancient civilizations, what specifically is he referring to? The geological history of Lake Titicaca, the Andes, and the Altiplano of Bolivia is complex, and the academic claims that have been made about this region over the last 150 years are varied and have changed over time. This is the case for much of the science of geology, as any of you who follow the work of Randall Carlson will know. The doctrine of uniformitarianism, or gradualism, was the emergent science's written goal for more than half a century during the 1900s. This is the idea that the Earth has always changed in gradual or uniform ways, and the relatively gentle, natural, and slow processes of things like erosion can be used to explain the landscapes that we see. For much of the science's early history, geologists sought to explain everything via these processes, in an effort to distance themselves from the catastrophism of religion, which prior to this time was the prevailing belief. I like to think of this period as something like a huge overcorrection, with the truth being much more likely to lay somewhere in between. Of course, nature's slow processes do shape landscapes over time, but free-thinking and rebellious geologists using modern science of the last 40 years or so have demonstrated that catastrophism most definitely played a part. perhaps demonstrated nowhere better than the channeled scablands of eastern Washington state in the US. This incredible landscape was shaped in a very short period of time by unimaginably catastrophic flooding, and it took geology pioneers like J. Harlan Bretz his entire lifetime to win the battle against the orthodoxy of uniformitarianism. And today his work is acknowledged in the Visitor Center for the Channeled Scablands, and his theories of catastrophism accepted. This is also the case for the Altiplano and the region surrounding Tiwanaku. In fact, Poznansky's research indicating that this area had suffered significant upheaval, severe climate change, as well as at least 2 periods of massive flooding is now being supported by geological studies conducted in the 1980s, as well as even more recent work investigating the effects of the cataclysm of the Younger Dryas period in South America. Poznansky describes a Tiwanaku, and in fact the area around Lake Titicaca, as consisting of 3 distinct periods of occupation, interrupted by periods of cataclysm and flooding. His research included extensive excavations both at Tiwanaku and in areas around the massive lake, whose shoreline today is roughly 17 kilometers or 10 miles from the ruins of the metropolis. Quoting Poznansky, quote, "The face of the earth has, with the passage of time, undergone great transformations. As a matter of fact, our knowledge about the origin of humanity is extremely limited. The deeper we penetrate, with the aid of science, into the secrets of creation, the more we realize how little we know and how far we are from solving these mysteries. Geology of the present day believes that the chain of the Andes, which surrounds the Altiplano, has undergone great transformations, that during some periods it submerged to a certain point, while during others it rose. We cannot stop to prove these assertions. Only future, serious South American geological studies will shed some light on this matter. The only fact established up to this time is that the mass of the South American continent is rising, and with it the Andean Altiplano, which, in remote periods, when its level was less than it is now, was the seat of a flourishing culture. As a result of an elevation, either abrupt or gradual, the ground today occupied by Lake Titicaca and the adjacent lands south and southeast of the lake, the greater part of the waters of the Andean lakes poured out. After this formidable flow, there remained a relatively small amount of salt water in the basin of Titicaca, so that its level was much below the present one. In the period following, we find the first traces of man's culture on the Altiplano, or rather on the banks of the pre-Titicaca. Somewhat later, we perceive a rapid rise in human development, manifested in the fact that man constructed on the banks of the lake, banks which are at the present time covered with water, primitive buildings of wrought stone. The first conclusive and indisputable proof which can be brought to bear in this connection is that Lake Titicaca, due to the great diminution of its waters, reveals today ruins of wrought stone which correspond to an epoch much before that of the Tiwanaku of the second period, and consequently to a stage which was perhaps the mother of the Tiwanaku of the first period. As is apparent from this fact, there can be found no more conclusive proof that in the epoch which preceded the Tiwanaku of the second period, the volume of Lake Titicaca was much less than in the time of the flowering of this great metropolis." End quote.
Wow, buddy.
Here, Poznansky describes the ruins of the first period, stone buildings both at Tiwanaku and around Lake Titicaca, although today they are under the water. At Tiwanaku, this period was characterized by the use of red sandstone as the primary building material, and many of the structures were semi-subterranean, being built into the ground. This period also seems to have been the genesis of an evolving art style that eventually culminated in the works of the incredible Sun Gate, which is a calendar, originally less of a gate and more a part of a much larger wall. Although the site has been thoroughly pillaged over centuries, some of this first period art can still be found at the Christian church found at the site today. This church was built almost entirely from stone ripped from the ruins, and it houses these idols of the first period, supposedly of a man and a woman at its gate. In today's time, you can still see them there, albeit they're protected by fencing. Poznansky continues with the geological history of the region. Quote, "Much later, a short glacial period occurred on the Altiplano, the residue of which, carried down by the glaciers, again closed the old drainage channels of the Andean Plateau. The waters from the melting ice then filled the basins and lower levels anew, covering the Altiplano almost in its entirety, to a height which corresponds today to nearly 3,845 metres, more or less, above sea level. With this considerable increase in its level, the lake covered nearly all of the Altiplano, which did not have even the inclination of 0.3 millimetres per metre towards the south, which it has today. End quote. Poznański is here describing a short glacial period, followed by a warming and melting that greatly rose the level of the lake to the point much higher than it is today. In fact, to a level that would have brought the waters to the very shores of Tiwanaku itself. As we will see shortly, the level of the water corresponded with the major building periods at Tiwanaku and Pumapunku of the second and third periods, when it was not only a city but also a harbour. And Poznański found the remnants of docks, as well as a sophisticated series of canals. Today, Lake Titicaca's level is some 35 or more metres, 90 to 100 feet below this level. And we know the water was at this level thanks to a well-documented and researched strand line, which runs across the Altiplano. What's interesting about this strand line, something that is perhaps a good indicator of just how long ago this might have been, is that today it has a significant tilt to it, as Poznański says, 0.3 millimetres per metre towards the south. This results in an 800-foot or 245 metre difference in elevation over around 375 miles of this strand line. Of course, this strand line was level when it was created by the water, and over time the geology of the Altiplano has shifted to give it this tilt. A book authored by H.S. Bellamy, published in 1943, entitled Built Before the Flood, which was very graciously sent to me by a patron, explored the issue of the tilting strand line further. Quoting Bellamy, quote, "Perhaps the greatest and most puzzling discovery which was made in connection with Tiwanaku was that at the time when the buildings of the so-called second period were erected, the prehistoric metropolis was not a city sprawling upon a gentle rise in a wide valley, but one situated on the shore in a sheltered bight of a sort of peninsula. For Tiwanaku was a harbour city, the remains of whose quay walls are still distinctly discernible, while a number of dock-like harbour basins and a canal can also be traced. And this strand line tells another and a very strange story. It has been carefully surveyed for a length of about 375 miles, and then it was established that it is not straight. The northernmost point at which the former strand line has been surveyed is on the mountain slopes near Silistani, to the west of Lake Umeo in the Peruvian department of Puno. There, the former littoral is about 295 feet above the present level of Lake Titicaca, whose surface is 12,506 feet above sea level. At Tiwanaku, in the southern end of Lake Titicaca, the same strand line is 90 feet above the level of that great sheet of water, and 4 feet below the coping stones of the parapets of the long dry harbours and docks and canals of that mysterious metropolis. The ancient strand line and the ruined prehistoric city are linked beyond any doubt. The height of the strand line relative to the ocean level decreases the further south we go. At the northern end of Lake Popo, on the mountain slopes south of Oruro, it is 12,232 feet above sea level, or 181 feet above the level of Lake Pupo, or 274 feet below the level of Lake Titicaca, or 364 feet below the level of the same ancient strand line in the latitude of Tiwanaku. End quote.
What's up, man?
It's worth emphasising the scale of what we're talking about here. Lake Titicaca today is absolutely huge. 190 kilometres or 118 miles long, with a shoreline of over 1,100 kilometres or around 700 miles. When the water was 100 feet higher, and thus at the shores of Tiwanaku, it would have filled almost the entire Altiplano, and Bellamy termed it the, quote, Inter-Andean Sea. This diagram from his book illustrates these levels. The dark blue is the modern Lake Titicaca and Popo, and the light blue corresponds to the level of water when it was at the shores of Tiwanaku. The yellow colour of the map is terrain over 14,000 feet. The tilting strand line of the higher water level exposes one of the several contradictions surrounding the orthodox dating of Tiwanaku, which was around 200 to 1000 AD. It's not just the strand line that confirms that the site was definitely a harbour. As mentioned by both Poznański and Bellamy, Tiwanaku and Pumapunku still feature the remains of quays and channels. Poznański's excavations at Tiwanaku also revealed the remains of fish and other aquatic species in the strata, some of the same species still living in Lake Titicaca, although in many cases significantly larger. So, given that the water that formed the strand line was once at the shores of Tiwanaku, which was a harbour, and given that water finds its level and that the strand line was once flat, and remembering the mainstream date for the end of Tiwanaku is around 1000 AD, is it likely that the geography of the Andes and the Altiplano have tilted to such an extent in over just the last 1000 years? Or is it far more likely that this process of tilting the strand line to its 800-foot delta from north to south has taken many thousands of years, and that Tiwanaku was constructed far earlier? It's an interesting problem, and one I hope to discuss with other researchers and geologists who might help to shed some more light on the enigma of the tilting strand line.
What is white lung syndrome? Pneumonia. Jesus Christ, man. It's everywhere. It's everywhere. Every single fucking station literally has an article on it. Everyone. Like, what is this? Oh, it was last year. It's too much, man. It's just too much.
Another challenge with our modern and relatively young dating for Tiwanaku has to do with the current climate of the Altiplano. Today, an arid and inhospitable place, not at all conducive to supporting the large population and civilization required to construct such a metropolis. Recall that Poznański referred to a short glacial epoch, which he speculates caused the end of the first period of occupation. He's not talking about the deep ice age of the Pleistocene here, but rather something else, something much shorter in duration. Keep this point in mind, as we'll return to it later. The fact remains that the current inhospitable climate of the Altiplano could not have been that under which Tiwanaku flowered and thrived, which it obviously did. The climate must have been very different during Tiwanaku's prime, and one of many lines of evidence for this is that today there can still be found the remains of terracing on the surrounding mountains. Terracing that goes right up into the current and permanent snow line. This is no good at all for agriculture now, but these terraces must have been used for that in the past, which is a clear indicator for a more benign climate, one that could have supported such a civilization. Arthur Poznański covers this in significant detail in his book, and we resume with him describing the situation faced by the second and third periods at Tiwanaku. Quote, "It is necessary to keep in mind that, after a short glacial epoch, which was the principal cause of the extinction of the first period at Tiwanaku, the Altiplano and its mountain range went through a period where the glaciers were reduced to a minimum and covered only the highest peaks of its mountains. It is therefore natural and correct to presume that there existed a benign climate. This was a favourable circumstance which made it possible for the man of the Altiplano to dedicate his activities and energy to the construction of a gigantic and sublime work, the ruins of which we admire today with astonishment and respect. Without the necessity of having to dedicate all his energies, as he does now, to acquiring his daily bread, and without suffering the annoyances and consequences of a harsh and inhospitable climate, he was in a position to carry out the stupendous work of Tiwanaku. After the refilling of the basin of Lake Titicaca took place, the content of which was no longer salty but brackish due to the great quantities of water from melting ice which were added to it, man's culture evolved extraordinarily. It extended not only along the shores of the Great Lake, but spread over the numerous and extensive islands also. Then it was that Tiwanaku man reached the apogee of his development, or, in other words, at the end of the third period. During this last lapse of time, the lake was extended to the very outskirts of the prehistoric metropolis. This is a fact which has been proven without any scientific refutation by the complicated system of canals which exist until today and which are in direct communication with the bed of the lake, surrounding all of Tiwanaku. The docks of the port of this city are visible at the present time. These docks of the prehistoric Andean city are situated 34 meters 73 centimeters above the level of the present lake. We know that with an increase of 34 meters in the level of the lake, almost all of the Altiplano would have been inundated, leaving visible only in the manner of islands the locations which would have been found at a height in excess of 3,845 meters above sea level. However, the still existing remains of the wharfs of the metropolis show where Lake Titicaca reached in the second and third periods of Tiwanaku. End quote. So, to summarise Poznansky so far, in deep antiquity, for whatever reason, Lake Titicaca was emptied to a level much lower than that of today, and in those low levels we find the traces of the first period. At some point later in time, the region went into a short glacial phase, ending the first period, but then the climate warmed and improved and the ice melted, and it filled the basin to a level above the current lake and to the shores of the site of Tiwanaku, giving rise to the second and third periods. These inhabitants of the second and third period were those responsible for the famous mystifyingly megalithic work whose remnants attract interested people to this remote place to this day. The hard andesite pieces, with many intricate, perfect inside corners and meticulously flat surfaces. Surfaces that have been shown to approach the flatness of glass have been measured down to but a few microns, thanks to the work performed by Patrice Poyard in his excellent documentary Builders of the Ancient Mysteries. The second period also did work with red sandstone, with one monolith at Pumapunku weighing in at an estimated 400 tons, and in places these also feature the same tiny precision drill holes as do some of the andesite blocks. The second period was responsible for creating the major elements at the site: the solar observatory known as the Kalasasaya, the stepped pyramid of the Akapana, as well as Pumapunku. The third period is distinguished by the efforts to renovate, repair, and extend these works, and by the fact that they only worked in andesite. One thing Poznansky is very clear about, and that his research demonstrates, is that there was no long period of degeneration or decay of this civilization. It seems to have ended abruptly, with many works left unfinished, the ambitious projects of the third period never completed, and Tiwanaku emptied. What could have happened to these people? To find out, we return to Poznansky's work. Quote, "Signs which leave no room for doubt show that outside of the Great Lake there existed, farther to the north, a number of smaller bodies of water, whose level was higher than that of the main lake. During one of the frequent seismic upheavals, the counterforts which held back the waters were opened, and as these lagoons were at a higher level, the waters were precipitated into the main lagoon. As a result, the level of the latter was temporarily augmented. As a consequence of one of these catastrophes, the Tiwanaku of the third period must have disappeared. During the many thousands of years which have transpired since the building of the monuments of the third period of Tiwanaku, the Altiplano has risen notably, as has been proven by conscientious and trustworthy observations. Consequently, the elevation, 3,847 meters above sea level, which is that of the ruins at the present time, was not the same during the flowering of the Andean metropolis." End quote. So, according to Poznansky, the great civilization of the Altiplano was eventually ended thanks to another massive flood that emptied higher elevation bodies of water into the Altiplano. There is another tilted strand line reported by Bellamy's work, one that is much higher than the intermediate level at the shores of Tiwanaku, several hundred feet higher. This seems like a tremendous volume of water, one that would require a truly significant source. I don't think this is the strand line representing the flood that Poznansky is referring to. He seems to be referring to a more transient but still catastrophic flooding event. That Tiwanaku was in fact flooded is eminently clear when you visit the site today, as much of it is still buried in alluvium, and even from Poznansky's original images, you can see that the site has been destroyed and blocks scattered everywhere. Walking around Tiwanaku and Pumapunku, in many places you can find the tantalizing prospect of precisely shaped megalithic blocks barely poking out from the reddish soil.
nightmare. It was
It
hell.
bears mentioning that almost
dumb.
all of what we can see today
I just got
at
stressed.
Tiwanaku has been
Scared.
excavated from the ground, and much of the site, particularly the Kalasasaya, has been rebuilt by modern hands in recent decades using material brought in. I've heard it said on other channels and by some people something to the effect of, there is no erosion at Tiwanaku, so it can't be that old. This is flat out false. Parts of Tiwanaku and Pumapunku show very great erosion indeed, as these were the elements from the site that were left exposed to the weathering of millennia. It's something that Poznansky commented extensively on in his work, and in fact he points to this as an indication of the very likely great age of the site. Andesite really doesn't erode very quickly, and certainly not in climates like the current one of the Altiplano,
I feel so sick.
because so much of the site was buried in alluvium or floodborne sediment. Ultimately, this had the effect of protecting and preserving the stones. A good example of this is the famous Sun Gate itself. It was found buried, face down, with only a portion of the back corner exposed, a corner which we can see today is quite badly eroded, while the incredible artwork on its face remained preserved. It was doubly lucky that it fell face down, probably from the flood, as had any of the artwork been visible when the Spanish conquistadors rampaged through here, it would have been utterly destroyed. As it is, they were the most likely cause for it being broken in half. Unfortunately, the damage wrought by the Spanish was only a small part of the destruction this ancient place has endured. Much like many other repositories of finely worked megalithic material, like the Great Pyramids of Giza or the gigantic polygonal walls of Peru, the stone blocks have been prized as building material by careless men and cultures who care nothing for the past, seeking only to enrich themselves. The stone of Tiwanaku has been carried off the site for centuries and used in the construction of many structures and houses in the city of La Paz, in temples across the Altiplano, and in the building of railways, sewage systems, bridges, and even mining machinery. In 1540 AD, Gyges de Leon visited the site, the earliest known written account of Tiwanaku, and it must have been quite a vision. Quoting Poznansky, quote, Gyges de Leon, who personally visited the celebrated ruins of Tiwanaku in the year 1540, saw still standing great ramparts and walls, which have now disappeared from the surface of the ground, and the traces of which the archaeologist can establish only by drawing up topographical maps. Since then, centuries have passed over these venerable spots, and in the course of this time, clumsy human hands have accomplished a much more destructive work than was effected in thousands of years, either by the ceaseless action of natural phenomena or the tireless and devastating labour of time itself. Sacrilegious hands have torn away these precious monuments, a testimony of prehistoric energy and genius, destroying the eloquent remains of the one-time splendour and glory. For whole centuries, these monuments were looted to construct houses, temples, bridges, etc., not only in La Paz but in other localities. Not without grief and indignation could one see, even a few years ago, how wagons reached La Paz daily, loaded to overflowing with those precious American relics, which were employed as construction material for a building which was being erected in the main plaza. And casting a glance back some 2 centuries, we see how the commissions sent by the clergy for the extirpation of idolatry devastated the monuments of Tiwanaku. Later, Alonso de Mendoza and his followers built with this same material, so well cut and so easy to obtain, the first part of the new city of La Paz. And this very same material is still used to build temples in a great part of the Altiplano. But even more damaging for the ruins of Tiwanaku than the devastating action of time, of natural phenomena, the work of the builders of cities and the zeal of fanatic guardians of the Christian religion, have been the excavations of Georgius Corti, 1904. Of all that which this inept and unscrupulous searcher may have disinterred in his excavation, there remains today not a stone in its place. The beautiful tiles of the Cloaca Maxima today serve as paving stones in the square of the village, and the stones carved with ornaments and the blocks of the coloured perron were carted off by the managers of nearby country properties to be embedded as decorations in the walls of the houses on the estates. Upon the occasion of each new visit to Tiwanaku, until a few years ago, one missed some of the old things and noted new traces of the labour of devastation caused by criminal hands from the village itself. The theft of the stones was increasing every day and, Had it continued, there would have been lost in a short time these remains of the remote civilization which must be called upon to illuminate completely the study of American prehistory. But due to the energetic action of the government officials during the terms of Pando, Montes, Villazon, Saavedra and Salamanca, an action without which there would exist today almost nothing of these ruins, such vandalic destruction was to a certain extent stopped. End quote. Poznansky spitting some literary fire there, but you can clearly hear his passion for the site and for its preservation. Although he gives the government the ultimate credit for protecting the site, it was his ceaseless lobbying of them that ultimately drove that action. And today, Tiwanaku is safe with a UNESCO World Heritage designation. It's worth noting here that the Tiwanaku of today is very different to the Tiwanaku of Poznansky's time. As mentioned earlier, much of it has been rebuilt and reconstructed. Just compare these photographs from Poznansky's works of the great solar observatory of the Kalasasaya to those taken during my several visits to the site. Only a few of the huge monoliths were left standing, and today the gaps between them have been reconstructed using smaller blocks brought into the site. I think it's possible, indeed likely, that the entire Kalasasaya was composed of such large monoliths originally. The famous sunken temple with the idol of Wirikosha in the centre and the stone heads in the walls is almost entirely reconstructed, with the original stones and heads located in a museum in La Paz. But some of the larger stones in the perimeter are original, with the faint outline of high relief carvings giving a hint to what might have once existed here. The Cloaca Maxima that Poznansky referenced in the last quote was his name for the reservoir or the dam that sits in the centre of the Akapana stepped pyramid. Today it's just a dry depression in the centre of the structure. This was once connected to an elaborate series of channels and was fully tiled in andesite. Some of Poznansky's images here show a few of these stones, the same ones that later disappeared, presumably pilfered as building material. These older images speak to me of some sort of functional purpose. Indeed, much of Tiwanaku and Pumapunku has an almost industrial feel to it. One block in particular, found behind the Akapana today, I think demonstrates the use and control of water. It's an andesite piece with the remnants of elaborate carving on the front. It's covered in tiny, precise drill holes that may have once held something else there, and the back of the block is curved such that, at least to me, seems to indicate something hydrodynamic, perhaps a sluice gate of sorts. I call it the super block as it has so many interesting features, and I'm looking forward to another closer look at it in the near future. Despite all of the destruction, quarrying, theft and careless excavation that has occurred here, there fortunately does seem to be much yet to be discovered at Tiwanaku. In recent years, there have been reports of an entirely buried pyramid found via ground-penetrating radar, as well as an entirely underground citadel that might take more than 50 years to excavate. Terrain mapping drones have revealed the huge extent of what might still be buried in sediment here, yet to be uncovered. The site itself likely extends underground also. Local rumours talk of staircases going down into the ground, and tunnels going beneath the Akapana pyramid have been explored with robots, but results from such tests are extremely hard to find, and the tunnels have since been resealed and hidden. So before we get into the astronomical dating of Tiwanaku, let's quickly cover another couple of points made by Poznansky that speak to a potentially vast age for the complex. He identified remains from Tiwanaku in the same strata layer in the soil that also contained a skull from a toxodon, an elephant-sized hoofed mammal that existed in South America during the Pleistocene and went extinct around the time of the Younger Dryas, roughly 11 to 13,000 years ago. Some of the artwork at Tiwanaku also seems to point to other extinct species from this period. There are many depictions of large cats amongst the carvings, which today are all classified as pumas. But in that case, as Poznansky points out, why do only some of these show cats with very large canine teeth, while others do not? Is it possible that these represent both pumas and smilodons, the so-called saber-toothed tiger? The name saber-toothed tiger is a bit of a misnomer. They aren't closely related to the tiger at all, but they did exist in South America and were one of many megafauna who went extinct at the end of the Pleistocene. Now, the primary method that Poznański used to pin a date of 15,000 BC to the second period at Tiwanaku was astronomical dating, based on changes in the obliquity of the ecliptic, analysing the alignment of the solar observatory, known as the Callicosaya, to the precise locations on the horizon of the sunrise during the solstices. The ecliptic is the plane projected by the Earth's orbit around the Sun, more or less the disk in which all of the planets orbit. The obliquity of the ecliptic is the angle between the plane of the Earth's equator and the plane of the ecliptic. As most people know, the Earth's axis is tilted, so that angle today is approximately 23.5 degrees. This tilt in the Earth's equator gives us the seasons as we orbit the Sun. Summer in the northern hemisphere occurs when it is tilted towards the Sun, and 6 months later, on the other side of the Sun on our orbit, it's tilted away, so it's cooler and hence winter. The degree of this tilt is not fixed, however. There is a slight oscillation to it, and its value swings between 22.1 degrees and 24.5 degrees in a cycle that takes around 41,000 years to complete. This motion of the change in the Earth's tilt is but one of several long-term motions of the Earth, loosely known as Milankovitch cycles. With careful analysis, and due to this change in the obliquity of the ecliptic, the exact location on the horizon of the sunrise changes, very gradually, over time. The solar observatory of the Callicosaya was constructed as a marker for the sunrise on the solstices, the longest and shortest days of the year. Poznański set out to measure the difference in the obliquity of the ecliptic at sunrise on the solstices between his time, around 1930, and when the alignment would have been precisely matched to the construction of the Callicosaya. It turns out that the structure also aligns with the locations for the sunsets on the solstices, I think making it undeniable that the Callicosaya is absolutely a solar observatory and not just some sort of coincidence, but this discovery would only be made long after Poznański had passed away. In his efforts at using this technique to date Tiwanaku, Poznański enlisted the methods of Sir Norman Lockyer, one of the pioneers of astroarchaeology. Quote, "Since olden times and also in our day, the question regarding the age of Tiwanaku is one which has fascinated scholars and laymen alike. Since these ruins were already debris in the period of the Inca Empire, capricious commentaries and conjectures were made about their existence and the men who built them, and especially about their age. Thus it is that until a little while ago, the chronological aspect of Tiwanaku constituted an almost indecipherable enigma. Only after conceiving the idea of investigating the age of these remains of human activity in prehistoric America, the most notable ruins which have come down to us, and using astronomical resources to this end, has a slight ray of light penetrated this mystery. It is not a new thing to study the age of archaeological monuments by astronomical means. Perhaps the person who carried out this class of investigations with most skill and understanding was Sir Norman Lockyer, president of the Physical Solar Observatory of London, who, in 1909, in his detailed work Stonehenge and Other British Stone Monuments, supplied the necessary foundation for the methodological investigation of the epochs in which there were constructed the monuments of remote antiquity. In these works, which we can call definitive, the author employed the method of approach of the learned Sir Norman Lockyer, or specifically used exclusively as a basis for the calculations the change of the obliquity of the ecliptic. In other words, the comparison of the ecliptic marked on the temple of the sun of the second and third periods, and that of the present time. Through the facts expounded in the preceding chapters, it has been proven beyond all doubt that the Temple Callicosaya was a true solar observatory located on the astronomical meridian, and at the same time a magnificent stone calendar. For reasons also set forth in previous chapters, it has been noted that when the observer stands at the center of the west wall of Callicosaya of the second period, the north and south pillars at the east wall are so located that the sun would rise at the solstices on the outer corners of these pillars. Also, approximately at the center of the building, let us say at the middle of the monumental perron, the sun appears on the morning of the equinoxes. Now then, if, at the solstices, one observes the sunrise without the aid of instruments, it will be noted that it does indeed still come up at the corners of these pillars. However, if we examine this phenomenon with precision instruments, we note a difference of approximately 18 minutes, which represents the change in the obliquity of the ecliptic between that of the period in which Kala Sasai was built and that which it has today. This difference has served as the basis for the calculation of the age of Tiwanaku. End quote. Poznansky spent years on the site carefully examining the alignment of the Kala Sasai, and also enlisted the help of several astronomers, like Professor Rolf Müller from the German Astronomical Mission, who spent several years on site confirming his results. The 18 minutes of difference in the obliquity of the ecliptic that is currently shown in the alignment of the structure was applied to the curve constituted by the formula of extrapolation recommended by the Ephemeris Conference of Paris in 1911. This formula produced a date of 15,000 BC, when the alignment would have been accurate, presumably the founding of the structure, which was built in the second period at Tiwanaku. When this date was published by Poznansky and by the astronomers from Europe that accompanied him, it was unsurprisingly met with fairly strong criticism, most of which just dismissed the findings with terms like absurd, and with no scientific refutation. Jose Imbeloni, a supposed scholar at the time, attempted to debunk these results, but in his efforts he confused the precession of the equinoxes with the variation of the obliquity of the ecliptic, two entirely different cycles, and also used incorrect measurements of the structure in his calculations by not distinguishing between the works of the second and third period. Not a good look. Poznansky's conclusions were confirmed by professional astronomers during his time, but despite this, he was well aware, almost prescient in fact, that both technology and our ability to make these observations might improve in the future, and that his work could be built upon. Quoting Poznansky, quote, "We have not the least doubt that someday our measurements will be controlled by competent geodetists or astronomers, and possibly certain errors or omissions will be rectified, which escaped us through faulty personal judgments or for other reasons. In spite of this, we are convinced that the way has been opened for the study of the stone calendar and the foundations laid for the calculation of the age of Tiwanaku. We feel, also, that our observations will be of help to those who, in the future, establish themselves in the region under study, and, having the necessary time and resources, face the study in all its amplitude, correcting errors which we may have made, and thus shedding greater light on the purposes for which that magnificent temple and stone calendar was constructed, and on the age of these notable ruins." End quote. Poznansky's prediction that his work would be improved upon in the future was indeed correct, and here we can find a very interesting connection to something mentioned earlier, that of a brief glacial period followed by a benign climate on the Altiplano. In modern times, the same exercise of using astronomical dating and the change in the obliquity of the ecliptic at the Kala Sasai was undertaken, using much more accurate information, computerized data, and the astronomical almanac, which gives us more reliable values for the changes in the Earth's tilt. Professor Niels Steed and Dr. Oswaldo Riviera analysed not only the eastern sunrise points of the structure, but also the western sunset alignments for the solstices. They concluded that all four cornerstones of the monument had been accurately positioned somewhere around 10,000 BC. Dr. Riviera resigned from his post as director of the Bolivian National Institute of Archaeology shortly after this announcement, presumably as a result of this heretical observation, a not uncommon occurrence for anyone in professional academia who dares to step too far beyond the approved timeline. What's interesting to me is that this more accurate modern date, roughly 10,000 BC, corresponds very closely to a significant period in Earth's history, that of the Younger Dryas Cataclysm, occurring some 12,900 years ago. Most likely the result of multiple impacts from a fragmenting comet, it caused catastrophic climate change, drove the huge rise in sea levels, plunged parts of the world into glacial conditions for nearly a millennia, and corresponds to the extinction of hundreds of species of megafauna. In a previous video, we took a deep dive into the effects of the Younger Dryas on South America by analysing a recent scientific paper looking at a site in Chile. The link to the video is below. Not only did this study show significant impact proxies in the strata, It indicated a massive extinction event in South America of more than 80% of megafauna, and it demonstrated a dramatic change in climate, both up and down the average temperature scale in various regions. When we combine the modern astroarchaeological date of 10,000 BC or 12,000 years ago, the Younger Dryas cataclysm of around 13,000 years ago, and Poznański's reporting of both brief glacial periods and consequent dramatic climate change, we can start to paint a picture for what might have occurred here. Is it not possible that the Younger Dryas cataclysm itself brought on the glacial conditions that ended the first period at Tiwanaku? As temperature graphs show, this cold period was geologically very brief, around 1,000 years, and then the Earth warmed very rapidly. As the glaciers melted in the Andes, filling Lake Titicaca to the shores of Tiwanaku, the climate had also warmed. Could this time in the past have given birth to the bounty of the second and third periods at Tiwanaku? This warming would have taken place right around 10,000 BC, which corresponds to the alignment and astronomical dating of the site. I think Poznański might well have been right in his assertions for the vast age of Tiwanaku, and it seems like modern science, particularly in fields outside of archaeology, are agreeing with him. It is just speculation, but very much like Plato's story for the sinking of Atlantis at 9,600 BC, aligning with Meltwater Pulse 1b and the end of the Younger Dryas, it is quite a remarkable coincidence that the dates for Tiwanaku line up so very well with those produced by modern research into the cataclysm of the Younger Dryas. Against all this evidence for a more ancient origin of Tiwanaku, mainstream academia has used a few C14 radiocarbon dated remains and the results of a process called obsidian hydration dating to outright dismiss Poznański's work. While these methods are undoubtedly useful, they're also not without their drawbacks. Carbon-14 dating doesn't work on stone and may only give you dates for the last campfire or for the last person to be interred in the ground. Both carbon-14 and obsidian hydration dating also rely on the use of constants in their calculation, when in reality these constant values can vary over time. Cosmic events, supernovas, or solar activity can affect the rate of carbon decay, and obsidian hydration dating assumes a constant rate of water absorption, which, as we've seen, likely varied in the extreme on the Altiplano as it underwent significant climate change over time. On the other hand, Poznański undertook a huge multidisciplinary approach, combining geology, astronomy, cultural, anthropological, and paleontological methods over 50 years to come to his conclusions. He dedicated his life to studying and to preserving the great enigmatic ruins of Tiwanaku and Pumapunku, and he and his work deserve to be taken seriously. Amongst the amazing relics of ancient civilizations, Tiwanaku stands as unique. There's nothing quite like it found anywhere else on the planet. So was Tiwanaku, as Arthur Poznański labelled it, the cradle of American man? There's certainly plenty of evidence to suggest that it might well have been, and that it may well be far older than our modern orthodox dating suggests. Hopefully, future generations of researchers and archaeologists can continue to work on this site with open minds, considering the full impact of adjacent sciences, to uncover the truth that...
Alright, we might as well.
Well, you're most welcome to today's talk. It's Wednesday the 29th of November, and as you see, we're running on very limited technology. But I wanted to do a talk today because I've been inundated with questions about this mystery wave of pneumonia which is occurring in children in China. Is there a new pandemic going on here? Now, the short answer to that question appears to be no, but there are some strange things that are happening that don't quite make sense. Now, we've had reports from China that there's been 3,500 children admitted to hospital in October and November. But there again, we've had reports from Radio Free Europe, which is saying that this is about 1,000 cases per day. So quite what is happening, it is a bit of a mystery. We haven't got all the details yet, and we will be following it closely, but I do have some tentative conclusions. Now, I'm going to put all the references, as always, to this in the description where I got this information from. Definitely the clusters of undiagnosed pneumonia, or a pneumonia where it's difficult to say what is causing it. Now, of course, we expect rebound infections because China was locked down probably more than any country on earth, certainly for longer than any other countries on the earth. So we would have a degree of what we call community immune debt, as children are catching up with infections that they didn't have during the lockdown period, but it doesn't really quite explain it. So hospitals in Beijing, in the northeast of China particularly, and are the symptoms usual or unusual seems to be somewhat unclear. The Chinese authorities, echoed by the World Health Organization, say it's the usual features of respiratory illnesses, but there are some things that are a little bit unusual, as we'll look at. Now, one interesting thing is that China has reported for the first time Mycoplasma pneumoniae. Now, this is Mycoplasma are an unusual type of bacteria, very simple, very small form of bacteria. And traditionally we've said that these can cause atypical pneumonia. Typically they cause pneumonia in children, although it only causes the pneumonia in the minority of children, but it does affect adults as well. So China are now talking about this Mycoplasma pneumonia. And it seems to be the first time. Now, they're admitting to COVID, influenza, respiratory syncytial virus, those things we would expect. But this one does seem to be new, and this could be the crux of the matter. Now, local reports are saying that there's inflammation in the lungs, which is what a pneumonia is. And they're also saying there's a high fever, which is not surprising, but they're also saying there's no cough, which is very surprising. Because typically with mycoplasmic pneumonia, we would expect generalized aches and pains, of course, typically a high fever around about 39 degrees centigrade, 102 degrees Fahrenheit. But we would usually expect a cough, but the reports are saying that there's not a cough. So this is a bit unusual, a bit inconsistent. And pneumonia normally in mycoplasmic infection only occurs in 5 to 10% of people infected with it, yet we seem to be seeing this glut of pneumonia. So it seems to be causing more pneumonia than we would expect, unless the infection with this mycoplasmic bacteria is incredibly common, which could well be the case. There seems to be a lot of it. Now, Chinese Centre for Disease Control has reported on this, and the World Health Organization, of course, has echoed pretty well what they've said, but they do agree there's an upsurge in respiratory illnesses amongst children in northern China. WHO report from the 23rd of November. Now, the World Health Organization has boldly approached China, as you might expect, and asked for laboratory results and data, recent trends in respiratory illness from China's
Don't we all? What's up,
authorities.
Notorious Gamer? How are you?
And one thing that really concerned
How can
me
I help
was
you?
the
I'm
World
not- I'm
Health
not an
Organization
expert.
have said they did this under the terms of the international health regulations, which of course we know they're in the process of trying to amend to
Oh
make them really
man, what's a
even
500
stronger.
deficit?
And of course we
150
obviously
grams.
know that China would apply
500 calorie
100% to the
deficit?
international health regulations. And whatever
man,
China said,
I
the
don't
World
know,
Health
dude.
Organization
If you're a
just
dude.
seems to have regurgitated that.
The
Anyway, leaving
weaker
that
you
point
get,
for now.
training very hard. I take a lot of
WHO,
rest.
Said China's health authorities have said that
I take
rising
a lot. I take like
is known to be
at least 2 days rest. Usually 72 hours.
adenovirus
When I lift, when I do heavy weightlifting,
but adding this mycoplasmic one
I
in.
usually take like
And we would
48 to
expect
72
more
hours. It's
infections
the
in winter, to be
back-to-back
fair.
day for me.
But
Just because I did a half
the
one yesterday. I'm
messenger
recovering
said
from the
this.
flu.
I'm just going to read something from the messenger online. I'll put the link for it. Chinese
I
medical
recover
statistics remain deeply unreliable, according to the messenger.
48 hours.
The
And
country still claims a total
not
COVID-19
enough.
deaths of 120,000, when independent estimates have said it's about
depends. I mean, per person. I'm not an
So is
expert though.
there
That's
a
just
deficiency in
me.
trust here? Is
I'm
it
kind of
just
lazy
World
though.
Health
I feel like I
Organization
can be
echoing what
bigger
China
than I
said?
am. I can be. I
Or
can
should we
be
expect
cut.
more
I can be more cut. I
interrogation,
can be
rigorous
stronger. I can lift heavier.
organisations, what people are uncomfortable with?
I can.
Now,
I'm
it is
pretty
China's
lazy.
first major winter without
But
restrictions, so it's
I'd
not
never
surprising.
feel weaker.
Mycoplasmic
Probably because I just take too much
pneumonia.
time off, maybe.
Mycoplasma pneumoniae is the name of the
But I don't know.
organism.
I'm not at a
They are
deficit
known to
either.
infect children more than adults, although it is
I pretty much.
not that uncommon in
me-
adults as well.
I'm
And the Chinese
50.
are saying there's no change in disease.
Yeah.
I
I take like 70 of whey every day, plus meat and stuff.
It's a bit unusual for the mycoplasma. Chinese authorities advise that since
Welcome,
mid-October they've got enhanced testing.
I don't know how often.
So the
Yeah,
Chinese authorities
that's
are partly saying
Like
this
the
is due to
frequency, that's
increased
kind of
surveillance.
where you say you're getting weaker and
True,
weaker.
there is increased surveillance, but there does still necessarily seem to be a really
How many
quite
days
big
off a week do you
surge.
have?
I've seen increased surges in the UK with things like respiratory syncytial virus, influenza in the United States. But this does seem to
Welcome.
be more than that. So this mycoplasma, it's a bacteria that affects the lungs. It can affect the lungs, but typically it causes walking pneumonia. These patients aren't normally ill and hospitalised. And it doesn't require bed rest.
Appreciate your
Normal
interest
response to antibiotics.
in my opinion.
Now,
I'm not an
is
expert,
there
but
going
you
to be
know.
another pandemic? I think the answer to that is no, because Medscape informs us that slow spread through household infection is common. So it tends to be household spread. You get infections in student halls of residences, military barracks with young adults, again, who presumably have little resistance to this. So it's typically a disease of young people, although, as I said, it can affect older people, particularly the older 65s. And very often the mycoplasma, it does occur in outbreaks, but it's not particularly seasonal. So probably, again, there's a slight inconsistency there with the seasonality.
Oh man.
So yeah, we expect these outbreaks, but this seems to be bigger than we would expect. Now, as you would expect,
Yeah, I've
university
by myself. If like I'm on a maintenance routine now, right? I'm not growing. I'm not doing anything. I'm just maintaining, which is nice. I'm at my like. I feel like I'm at. I don't know. I'm at a comfortable spot. Could be bigger. It could be more cut.
It was indicated that there would be a lockdown, some sort of rebound infections, and that is true, but again, this seems to be more than that. Now, we know that these mycoplasma pneumonia infections have been common. Teachers have been getting ill as well as children. Now, bacterial pneumonia can often occur after a viral infection. So one question is there a common virus here that's predisposing people to bacterial infections? Could this be a novel virus? Well, we simply don't have the data to know that. But we do know that bacterial infections are more common after viral infections, and people have less resistance to novel viral infections. So that's by no means precluded. But I think perhaps the main thing that's going on here is we've got studies from Beijing that show that the bacterial resistance to mycoplasmic pneumonia in Beijing is between 70 and 90%, and this is based on old data. Now, normally we treat mycoplasmic infections with antibiotics ending in mycin, like erythromycin, clarithromycin, azithromycin. Or sometimes as a standby we can use levofloxacin as a secondary choice. It could well be that there's a lot of bacterial resistance now in China, and that is meaning that any children that are infected with this organism, this typical atypical, it's typically called an atypical infection. It is atypical, it's a term we use often. But really it's not a good term to say atypical, it's really mycoplasmic pneumonia. But there's a lot of bacterial resistance to that. So where does that leave us? Well, at the moment with no evidence for a novel virus or bacterial infection. Doesn't mean to say it's not there, but with no specific evidence for that. Apart from the fact that these infections could be occurring after viral infection. I think what we're probably dealing with here is potentially dangerous mycoplasma antibiotic resistance, meaning that if this spreads around the world, people that get mycoplasmic infections are probably going to have difficulty treating them. That's the perhaps main danger I see at the moment. It's possible bacterial infections after a novel virus, but that is less likely. A new pandemic I do not think is imminent due to slow household transmission, typically, of mycoplasma. Now, the fact that this could be multiple drug resistant mycoplasma, is not going to change its transmission characteristics and its pathogenicity. The bacterium is essentially the same. It's just that it can't be treated with the antibiotics that typically could be treated with. And because it's not treated with the antibiotics, there's going to be more of it around, so there's more potential for spread. So we could see slow spread of this around the world. Now, quite why the Chinese authorities and the World Health Organization wouldn't want to discuss something as straightforward as bacterial resistance is difficult to know, but there is a picture of secrecy in certain authorities in China, so it's not that surprising, really. So it could be slow spread of multiple antibiotic resistant spread of mycoplasma.
What is up, Miss Kirby?
Now, the World Health Organization unfortunately doesn't mention the need to optimize. It talks about preventing spread with mask wearing and isolation. It didn't work very well in the COVID pandemic, did it? But in their press release, I can't read anything about optimizing the immune system, nutrition, vitamin D, sleep, exercise, appropriate antigenic challenge in the light of the hygiene hypothesis. I didn't really say anything about that. And I certainly didn't say anything about upgrading the innate immune system, as we've seen from discoveries and research by Professor Angus Dalgleish with his injectable preparation and Professor Robert Clancy with his oral preparation to upgrade the innate immune system. So it's a pity these aren't being talked about. So that seems to be what's happening. Big problem. We don't know of children dying yet, but that could be the case. We simply don't have that information. There's claims that children are not dying. Let's hope that is true. But we could be dealing with spread of significant antibiotic resistance in this mycoplasmic pneumonia, which could become a global concern. And perhaps we can no longer fully depend on antibiotics the way we once could, and perhaps we need to be looking at ways of upgrading the immune system so that if people get this infection, it is less serious for them to suffer from. So new pandemic, don't think so. Slow spread of antibiotic resistance, probably, is my reading of this so far, based on very limited data. But I hope that helps, and of course if more data becomes available, we'll talk about that as soon as the data becomes available. But for now, thank you for all your questions that you're sending in, and thank you for watching.
Give me a minute, no worries. Take your time, take your time. You being here is the surprise journey.
That likely lies still undiscovered, waiting patiently beneath the sediment and soil of the remote Altiplano of the Andes. Thanks for watching. Hello all, welcome back to Uncharted X. This is Ben, and this video is another video swapcast with my good friends Kyle and Russ, the venerable brothers of the Serpent. In this episode, we're taking a deep dive look at all of my footage of a few places in Peru. We're starting with Ollantaytambo, which is really probably my favorite overall site in Peru. It's just a remarkable little spot. It's skipped by a lot of people as it's the gateway to Machu Picchu. It's where you board the train when you go there. But it really has some incredible secrets if you go looking closely at it. I think this site is the best example of a site with the three disparate and different styles of architecture that you see in South America all mixed together. You have the Hanan Pacha, which is the older monolithic style that's really carved out of living rock, almost as if the rock looked like it was flowing. It typically looks incredibly ancient. You have the Uran Pacha, which is the typical megalithic style, the cellular architecture of all of the polygonal blocks, the stuff that Peru is really famous for. And then you have Ikun Pacha, which is what I would characterize as the Inca work, these small stones, local stones, typically done maybe with some mud mortar. You have all of these three styles really mixed together at Ollantaytambo. We're also getting into the Coricancha, which is the megalithic structure at the center of Cusco. We kind of mentioned that in the previous episodes about Sacsayhuaman. I think it was all connected together. But the Coricancha is somewhat unique in its particular style of megalithic architecture. You see a lot of the Uran Pacha here, which is the cellular work, but it's very, very fine work. You also see represented some of the shapes that you see the Inca later on tried to replicate. And then lastly, we're going to take a look at a place that's not often visited. It's another site around Cusco called the Temple of the Moon. And this is a very much Hanan Pacha structure. This is one of the oldest sites, I think. It looks incredibly ancient, and it is mostly made up of that older style of monolithic work that's carved into the mountainside itself. It's just an intriguing site. So in any case, I'll let us get on with it in the podcast. I hope you enjoy, and I will see you all in the next one. Cheers.
And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. We are once again joined by Ben from Uncharted X. This is the fourth. Is this the fourth one of this swapcast?
I think it is.
I think so. Yeah, I think it's the fourth one. And this time we're staying in Peru, and we're gonna look at Ollantaytambo and the Coricancha.
Yep.
And one other site. Which
Indeed.
Site was it?
The Temple of the Moon. It's one of the sites up around Cusco. It's not something that typically gets a lot of exposure as far as I can tell. It's a really interesting site. little interesting contrast to some of the other styles that you typically see. But yeah, good fun. We'll see how we go for time. But yeah, I've got all of those lined up. Should be interesting.
All right, fantastic. Yeah, I have to say, the Egypt stuff is always fascinating, but there's something about, and I think we talked about this last time with Matt. There's something about the Peruvian ruins,
Right.
especially the more megalithic stuff, and then of course the stuff that to us looks very old, that's carved out of the living rock. That's haunting. It's just it's so enigmatic. Both in style, and trying to comprehend how they accomplished it, as well as in a lot of cases, what the hell is it for? When you're looking at these strange shapes carved out of the stone, and you're just like, what were they doing? Like, what was even the purpose of this? So,
I feel you.
It's a mystery all the way.
I don't get it. I mean, there's definitely this level of enigma that seems to come with the South American stuff that's at a high level. You can really see the civilization touch. I think you relate a little bit more to some of the
You're
stuff
awesome,
in Egypt
Journey.
almost.
Thank you.
And then it's just
you
as
being
you say,
here.
the Peruvian and South American, a lot of it is just, it's hard to imagine what they were thinking when it first happened. Like, yeah, there's so many examples of that, and particularly the Hun and Pacha stuff, which is the oldest sort of monolithic style. It's all these shapes that are carved out of mountains.
Yeah.
And they're not all. I mean, some of them may have been quarried, but I mean, a lot of it isn't quarried. Like there's deliberate shapes and deliberate things going on that you wouldn't have done if you were just quarrying there. And we'll see a ton of examples of it. But it's a little frustrating because most of the time you end up in South America, it's like you just don't know. Like I think there's just so much more mystery because there's. To me, there's a bigger gap. Like you don't have like we have kind of the dynastic Egyptian connection, if you like, that they flew on. They I feel like they flowed on from that precursor culture, and there's something there. But in South America, it seems like there's a much bigger gap between the megalithic builders and then the later cultures. And even though they respected and revered all of the work, it's hard to sort of comprehend its purpose or what it was for or even how it was done. So yeah, it's frustrating. You end up with like I don't know all the time.
Exactly, and it's again with the three styles, it's strange because when we look at the middle style, the second one, it's beautiful, and yet still you're like, how did they do that? That's the first question. You're like, how did they even do that? And then you can tell that they're sort of, like you've pointed out many times, that they're sort of enclosing this older style that's it's like you say, monolithic or even just rock cut out of stone that's in the mountain. Yeah. And I wonder if those people, the second style builders, even knew what the first style was for.
Yeah. I wondered the same thing.
Yeah, in the same way that you see the Inca come along and then they build on top of all of it, and did they know what the second people were doing? And that's the other thing is that in Egypt the most enigmatic structures clearly are the ones that have no writing on them. They're completely bare and they're beautiful, monolithic, megalithic style, and you just look at it and you kind of have this mystery because it's completely unmarked, or they found a statue or a piece of a head somewhere nearby, and they're like, all right, that guy built it. But, we don't really know because there's no writing on the stone. And it's the same way with these. We see these animal figures. There are snakes. There's what looks like maybe a puma or a cat or maybe a lizard in some cases. But there's it's just there's three styles of building, and I'm wondering if any of the people that did any of the building knew anything about the other people that did the building. That's the question. Right. Is like, how long between these styles was there?
Yeah, right. And I think one of the things you can see, particularly with the older style, is that it's just, look, I'm not a geologist, and it's always hard to tell these things.
I understand because I'm a yo-yoing.
So ancient, like particularly the old style, and we'll see that at the Temple of the Moon, which is primarily that Hun and Pacha old. I call it the older style, but it's that monolithic living rock. It's which mostly shapes carved from an existing rock outcropping, not so much walls made from cellular stones, and it just looks so old. And I agree, like, who knows, there's definitely some sort of reverent, they recognized that they were looking at something that either was special or it had some meaning, or they just found it profound because they understood how difficult this work was. That's when you end up with this protection and this inheritance, I think, and this sense of reverence. And we find that and I love the best example is really how when you go to these sites, how you feel about it when you're interested, not just a tourist passing by like for no reason, but if you're actually interested in the topic and you go to these sites, you find it profound and interesting. I think the same thing has happened in the past. So whether they have any deeper connection to the prior builders, I don't know either. It doesn't feel like it almost. It's like, well, we're going to preserve this. We're going to make this our sacred site. We're going to add our touches to it, use it for our purposes. And that happened a couple different times. That's what it seems like. It's like it wasn't just the Inca, and then at least once or twice before that. It seems to be what's happened. And even today, we're adding our touches to it. We're like, let me I'll flip over to here so we can, you guys can see that.
Yep.
Yeah. So this is, and I'll roll the video in a second, but this is Ollantaytambo, and we're adding our touches to it. Like, we make it a tourist site. It's not like an elites only, ceremonial site. Although certainly in our civilization, some of these sites like the Sphinx and the pyramids have been used as such, but these days they're tourist sites, and we add our touches to them. It's sort of, we're just following on, I think, to the same thing that's happened in the past. But yeah, I hate ending up at that same place all the time, which is, I just don't know. It's a lot of it is hard to explain.
Yeah. Well, I think that's actually important, is to start from that, like to acknowledge, okay, we don't know.
Right.
And then you can start asking the interesting questions, right?
Exactly. Yeah, and I mean, sure, we found pot shards and we found datable material that relate to different cultures and styles, but that doesn't mean that they're responsible for the stonework. It means that the place has been occupied and used. In 1,000 years, when you find this sign here, the Parque Arqueológico Nacional Ollantaytambo, that'll be evidence that says, oh, it was these people that made it. It's the same. I think it's hard to. There's a relationship thing that happens with how the story gets dated into history, and of course, this is one of those sites that they more or less attribute to the Inca. There's the Quilca culture, a couple other cultures as well, that the precursors, but most of the work they will tell you was done by the Inca, being the largest known civilization in that time, in that era. It's really weird with the dating too, because it's Inca civilization was 150 years old from start to finish, more or less, and they're certainly not the oldest. I mean, there's acknowledged. Peru's this real mystery. You've got the Corral and 5,000-year-old sites like that, where there's pyramids up in the desert. You've got a site that we should look at is Corral, but another one is Chavan Temple, which is thousands of years old. So all of these precursor cultures that also did some pretty impressive work, but it's not the Sacred Valley. So the Sacred Valley typically gets attributed to the Inca, more or less.
What about the I'm not going to get this wrong, Chulpas, the towers?
Chulpa Towers? Yeah, that's another place. Chulpa. Yeah, it's Silistani, I think the name is of the site. Yeah, it's we'll look at that one as well at some point. That's around Lake Titicaca. That's straight up same megalithic work, different form in the towers, but the blocks and there's actually some gigantic. People know the towers, but at that site there's also that's a place that also looks immeasurably old. It looks like it's been horrendously damaged. Like there is remnants of walls with these giant blocks in them. Like some of the biggest single piece cellular blocks that you'll see anywhere in Peru are at that site. Like 10 feet tall and like almost Sacsayhuaman style.
Wow.
Like size. There's a bunch of blocks on walls, and it's just been jumbled up, and that whole site's just a mess of blocks and things. And I think a lot of those towers have been put back together, and some of them have been repaired, not just by us, but also before us. But in general, like, that place looks really old, really weathered, and that's a good one to look at in the future. But let's maybe we can talk about this as we go too. But Ollantaytambo, so I'll let this roll, but just so rough geographical description of it. I mean, this is one of the sites in the Sacred Valley. This is where you catch the train. Most people come here to catch the train to go to Machu Picchu, but the site's worth looking at. And it's built into a very steep hill, which we'll see here. It's in a valley. There's mountains all around it. Part of the site runs up the side of one of these mountains and around it. In fact, it spreads out on a couple different sites. And there's a town at the bottom, in between these mountains, if you like. And that's always been a town, and it's still a town today, called Ollantaytambo. It has hotels. You can stay there. It's like kind of like a mini Cusco. It's a nice little spot. So let me do this, and I'll mute this audio too, because it's just wind noise mostly. But we'll get some audio out of it later.
Yeah, look at those mountains. Wow, and the terracing.
Yeah, right. So the Sacred Valley's super terraced, and we'll get a closer look at that on the far mountain. I don't know if you can see it, but there is also work over there. They call those the granaries. We can talk about it a bit later on.
Okay.
But you see, one thing that I always like to mention is a lot of this work is Inca. A lot of it is terracing that the Inca did. Like that's one thing that they definitely indelibly left their mark on the hillsides through the Sacred Valley. They're incredible. They sculpted the mountainsides. You know, they made gardens out of them. The terracing work, and it's all done with these little stones. And there's a real significant difference between it and the megalithic work. And that's a good example. You have the bottom layer here is megalithic, and then the Inca have built a lot of those walls in between. So that some of these terracing layers may not have fully existed like this originally. And again, you know, obviously heavily damaged. There is just rock and cut rock everywhere. Like, real weird, just buried in the stone. And then notice on this one, you've got sort of cut faces plus these big scoop marks on the block.
Yep.
See those scoop marks? It's kind of nutty. Almost
Yeah,
as
and
if
there's
something...
what looks like a random boulder, but it's been cut in half, or like there's a sheer face on one side of it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that was probably my hand pointing out scoop marks as we were walking past it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and in fact, so where we're walking here is this kind of follows along the bottom level, like the ground level, if you like, at the bottom of where the terracing starts, and looks at. There's some really good examples of where you see a lot of megalithic blocks, and then a lot of other styles. So you see it everywhere here. This is a great site for looking at the three different styles of stonework. So as we go through this, pay close attention to where you see obvious megalithic work, how it's been repaired with later Inca work, and then also where you'll see this in a lot of places, the Hananpacha, the monolithic work, the original work, which I would classify this as. Like this is a working water feature. The water's not flowing a lot right now, but this is one of those incredible shapes that's sort of been wrought into stone. And you get
multiple inside corners.
Yeah.
And it's just an aesthetic design, right?
Yep. Yep.
Yeah,
seems to be
lots of work on there, and then you can tell that the outside has been either is damaged in some places, and maybe somebody tried to fix some areas. Yeah, very interesting.
And the nice thing about it, we'll go through the footage and then we'll look at photos after, because the photos will give us a cleaner look at some of these individual objects, but the video kind of gives you a bit of context for where it all is. Yeah, you get told some stories about that's a very famous fountain. About how the water doesn't when it's flowing properly, it spurts out, doesn't touch it. There's some strange things. There's some real nice lentil blocks that are obviously been recycled from, megalithic sites and then built as part of probably the original Inca settlement. You can see the modern town, still mud brick and adobe in the background. It's just a beautiful place. The Sacred Valley in Peru just is spectacular under any circumstances.
Basically walls of mountains on either side.
Yeah. Steep mountains. And you're up.
Yeah, that's interesting that the modern structures are mud brick. Right.
Well, yeah.
Ancient ones are giant blocks.
Right. Yeah, it reminds me of that story about Egypt with the Egypt Rising statue made in the 50s that made from granite. They bolted it together, but they had to send it to Italy to be polished because Egypt couldn't polish the granite stone in the 1950s. I'm like, really strange that.
Wow, look at those mountains. That's just awesome.
Yeah, I remember this was a breezy day. This was 2016, this footage. We were in here with, this is the group of the people you'll see, the group I was with, small group.
Is that terracing way up there on that?
It is.
Sorry.
There is terracing on that far hill. There's also these structures. They would call them the granaries up on the hill behind us. Maybe I can go back real quick.
Yeah, I think I've seen some pictures of those.
Yeah, and I have pictures of them as well. It's up here behind this tree, and I'll just pull it real quick when it gets here.
Yeah, you can see some regular.
Yeah. So there's staircases, and there's these, and that's like stone terracing and structures, and they would. The story they tell you is the Inca used them as grain storage because it was cool. It was always cold, like the wind would blow through there to stay dry. Whether or not that's...
They hauled all their grain up there to store it.
That's a lot of... Right? You can see the switchbacks. Like it's mountain goat people, that's for sure.
So is there any evidence or research on, say, previous
water levels there, like during other time periods when the ocean levels were different? Like, are
Not,
there water marks anywhere on those mountains?
not that I know of in the Sacred Valley, because you do have a river at the bottom, and I'm sure there's maybe some. I'm sure that's been up and down, but not like. I don't know about like cataclysmic levels of water through the Sacred Valley. For sure, there is. In fact, it's as part of the work that I'm slowly trying to get through with Poznansky's book about Tiwanaku that has a lot about Lake Titicaca. There's a lot. I think the interesting studying. I think a lot of, because a lot of the water I think flows from there, and I think that's that might tell us more. I need to learn more about it basically, about the historical levels of that lake, because I think it has a lot to do with Tiwanaku. But here, I mean, in this valley, this is a true valley. Like this would have been. I don't think at any time is this like a river that, you know, it's a raging river today. And I can only imagine if it was like 100 times the size that it is now. But yeah, I don't know about historical levels in the actual Sacred Valley.
What about ice in the mountains?
There's definitely still ice. There's still a lot of like in the Andes.
Yeah, isn't there permanent ice on some of the mountaintops?
Well, yeah, you have stuff that goes up to 20,000 feet more or less.
Right, and I think that I can't remember where I read this, but I was reading about that you know, there may have been more of that during the last ice age. That there may have been a lot more ice in those mountains.
Well, I imagine there was, because anything like there must have been. Because same as Kilimanjaro, it's just equatorial. You're in, it's I mean, Kilimanjaro in particular is like equatorial, and it's glacier. Everyone makes a big song and dance about, oh, there's no ice on Kilimanjaro, it's melting. It's been melting for 12,000 years, funnily enough, since the end of the last ice age. Like it's, you know, like that's what's happening. But it's same thing, I think, in the ice packs in the Andes. But and some of the pictures I've got, I don't know if we get into them here, but as you drive between the Sacred Valley and Bolivia, you go up over 14,000 feet through the pass. You see the big Andes mountain range, and there's a lot of it's just snow capped and always ice. This is yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say this is that area I talked about. That was that Malco Arabaldo, one of the guys we had on this trip, sort of has identified, or he thinks he's identified as a calendaring system, or the shadow that these nubs cast on this wall. But again, this is obviously not quarried. Like this was carved, and these shapes have been made on like bas relief or high relief.
Thank you for being here.
For some reason.
Yeah, see, and this has always bothered me with these nubs. You know, people wonder, are they lifting things or eroded? You know, I mean, like, well, okay, why did they make them
Journey for 100
on
bits
the
and
freaking
do that.
mountainside?
I appreciate so much. I'm
Like
glad you
those-
have my emotes.
those,
Glad you want to have emotes of me.
Aren't for lifting.
Yeah, that's a great point.
It's not for lifting. This is true. Those ones aren't for lifting.
Thank you.
I mean, it's clothesline.
And they're
That's
also
probably-
not
Curse.
they're also not geopolymer
Curse
injection
demon.
ports unless they're trying to made the entire mountain, right? I
They're
mean,
not that
God,
either.
I'm so
Yeah.
tired, man.
But you
Yeah.
couldn't. I mean, you couldn't look at the rope at anything vertical; it'd slip right off it. It's obviously. I mean, you could hang
Feels
something
terrible.
off it, but it seems like a lot of
Yeah.
effort to go to
I
make
feel
like
terrible.
a clothesline.
yeah, you have to cut, I don't know, like a ton of material off of that face to leave that one nub,
Right. Yeah.
right? Because
Yeah.
that nub sticks out, what, 6 inches? So you've got to cut
think it's
all that
more,
material off
yeah.
that face to the height of a person to leave that nub there.
It's a little bigger than that, actually. It's it's hard to see the scale until we see pictures
Yeah.
later on with people standing in it. Yeah, there you go. So it's
Okay. Yeah. More like a foot. Yeah. Maybe
yeah,
a
yeah,
foot.
closer to a foot.
So what are the I mean, so they talk about it being a calendar. Is there? I mean, is there a model that someone's come up with for how it's a calendar?
So apparently Malco has, and Malco Arabal is the guy. He's not my favorite person, but he's actually in that BAM documentary. He's a very proud sort of Inca traditionalist, and he's done some interesting work with alignments. And I haven't. It's his books in. I think it's in Spanish. So I'm not sure, but he was talking about it when we were there, and I haven't done any more research to see what he's done. But I know he's been in a few documentaries, but he was. We were beneath his time on this trip. It was funny. This trip was only about 10 people. It was done as like a special favor to Elizabeth Arjuna, who's was the right-hand woman to the current keeper of the Mayan calendar. She's a Guatemalan. She's in 85. There's some backstory to it, and she had arranged for Malco to come with him. And he's like, I'm used to taking groups of 60 people. And as soon as he'd heard that I'd been to Peru before, he didn't like that. He didn't like that I even knew who Brian Forrester was. And he just was. you must think the aliens did it kind of thing. He's very proud. He's like very much against any idea that the Inca didn't do everything, and he had a reason for why everything is the way it is, and why the styles are so different. He would just call that the organic style, but he was very standoffish the whole time. But I don't know. And in fact, I just didn't argue with him, but the whole group kind of was like, this guy, and he's like, well, I mean, would make comments like, don't give credit